Thank you very much indeed. Listening to that here with me in the studio, Heidi Allen, the Conservative MP for South Cambridgeshire, the UKIP Parliamentary Party in its entirety, its MP for Clacton, Douglas Carswell, and the Labour MP for Aberavon, Stephen Kinnock. Welcome, all of you. And Stephen, just to pick up on that Trident point, are you one of these MPs who would consider a separate pro-Trident manifesto if Jeremy Corbyn does change party policy to oppose renewal of the nuclear deterrent?
Well, I lived and worked for over 3 years in Russia, and I've been up close and personal with the Putin regime. I'm absolutely of the view that now is not the time to drop our guard. So I believe that we should certainly have a nuclear deterrent. I think Trident is very expensive, and I want to look very carefully at other options, but I am absolutely committed to us having a nuclear deterrent, and I hope that the Labour Party's policy will continue to be the one we've had for the last 30 years. If it isn't, then yes, I would seriously consider standing on an alternative proposal if we had to come to that pass. But I deeply hope that we won't, and I hope that the review will conclude that we should keep the policy that we've had for the last 30 years.
Let's move on to the big issue, Europe. And Douglas, you are part of the Vote Leave campaign, and we heard that it's vying for attention and for the designation as the one out group with leave.eu. A lot of words have been exchanged between the two groups, but let's keep it clean. You said this morning the group you support, Vote Leave, will get the designation. Now, it's certainly winning prizes for disunity, but do you think it deserves the designation? Because it's had Labour MPs leaving it. It's not necessarily a cross-party group anymore, is it?
Hang on a second. The campaign to leave the EU is an authentic, popular movement. You're going to inevitably get different ideas. We're not a product of the elite. We're a product of the grassroots. You're going to get different ideas about how to campaign. Look, in my surgery on Friday, I had two gentlemen who came in to see me who had designed their own poster for the campaign. Everyone has a role. There are lots of contributions to be made. But I think that Vote Leave is going to get designation, and I think they're best placed to win the referendum. They've got very experienced people who've run referendum campaigns, successful referendum campaigns before. And the kind of campaign that we need to win is going to be optimistic, upbeat. It's going to be focused, it's going to be internationalist. It's going to be focused on the fact that if we leave the EU, we're going to become more prosperous. Our energy bills will go down, our food bills will go down, we'll pay less tax.
That argument's not going to get through, is it, as long as there is this bickering between the groups? Now, how do you suggest that those differences are resolved?
Well, the Electoral Commission will make its decision fairly soon. You're dealing with, if I may say, plutocrats and politicians, and whisper it gently, but sometimes when you're dealing with politicians and their personal preferences, sometimes you get a little bit of ego. But, you know, it's not going to detract from the real choice, which is that if we vote to leave, we can spend our money the way we want to. We can spend our money on our priorities. Every week, this week, we spent £350 million, which we sent to Brussels. Think of what we could do with that money in terms of the NHS. Think of what we could do in terms of science with that monny. We could do an awful lot if we didn't keep on sending that money to Brussels.
I don't want to trade statistics, but we do get some of that money back in rebate and some back in grants. So we just want to try
and through access to the single market, which is worth billions of pounds for the British economy through trade.
But let's not have the argument about in or out now, but just about the process. Heidi, do you think the Prime Minister has secured enough to satisfy you to campaign for in?
At this stage, no. And I probably fall into the bit in between, the bit in the middle. It's quite interesting. We were chatting, the three of us, before we came in the studio tonight, that those of us that are very much out, I think nothing the Prime Minister says will change their minds. Those that are very much in, equally nothing will change their minds. Has the door been open to the possibility for those of us in the middle? Yes, I think it's it's a first stab, and it gives opportunity for us to learn more. But we still don't know enough detail. We have to hear from the rest of Europe in terms of whether they will agree to these proposals.
But is it enough? That on many of his initial demands, the Prime Minister fell short.
Well, it's a negotiation, isn't it? You're going to pitch high and hope that you'll get 80% of what you ask for. For me, what it's coming down to, and I think probably what will do it for me and maybe a lot of people, yes, we can talk about statistics and money in and money out, but ultimately I think it'll be in those quiet polling booths how we feel.
Will your decision be based on what's in your heart rather than what your constituency association might say, which is what David Cameron was suggesting you should do?
Well, my constituency association and I have a fantastically mature relationship where we respect each other's views. And, I have a lot of very bright people in Cambridgeshire, and I think it's important that all MPs should respect not just their associations, but the individual constituents' views.
So what did you think of David Cameron's words then? Do you share the anger of grassroots Tories?
Yes, but, as I say, in my association, we're mature enough to take it with a pinch of salt, to be honest, and it's just water off a duck's back.
Douglas?
Even though David Cameron's promising us an emergency break on in-work benefits, which we can't actually trigger without the permission of the Commission, even though he's offering us a red card that only confirms the subservience of our Parliament, I actually think this has been an incredibly worthwhile exercise, because it means that unintentionally perhaps, the public ahead of the referendum knows that the EU can't change. They're not interested in change.
I disagree.
If when the fifth largest economy in the world, their second largest net contributor, is threatening to leave, if this is what they offer us, imagine how they would treat us if we were to vote to remain.
Heidi doesn't agree.
Because I think, the EU is probably the biggest tanker ship out there. And anybody who's taken large organisations through significant cultural change know it doesn't happen overnight. This will be the start of a process, and we can't hope to begin that process unless we're in it. So I think it's the first road on the road to changing it completely.
Stephen, Labour's manifesto called for a 2-year curb on migrant benefit levels. Do you agree then with David Davis, the Conservative MP, who's saying today that proposing this curb on benefits in future will only act as an incentive to workers to head to the UK now and over the coming months before a deal can be implemented?
I mean, I think overall the Prime Minister got a decent deal. It's very difficult to have this kind of negotiation when you're holding a gun to people's heads. In my view, reform of the EU is a process. It's not an event. The only way you really get to change is by being at the table, and the blood, sweat and tears that comes from building coalitions, building alliances, rather than this fantasy that you can just pull up the drawbridge and float off into the mid-Atlantic and continue to exert any kind of influence in that way. So the fact is that on the migration question, the free movement of people is one of the fundamental 4 freedoms of the European Union. It's foundation of free movement of capital, services, people and labour. And if you start to try and unpick that, of course, the EU is going to have to negotiate with you in a very strong way, because otherwise the whole thing starts to unravel. So the Prime Minister's gone in, he had a difficult hand, he's played it as well as he could. I'm now really pleased that this has come to an end. It's been a bit of a sideshow, to be honest. We can now have a proper debate about Britain's role in the world and Britain's role in the European Union.
But let I just bring you back to David Davis's point that the EU benefit plans could cause a surge in migration before the emergency brake is applied.
It's possible, but the thing with migration is because, we have free movement, and there's all these numbers and figures and statistics that get bandied around. Quite frankly, I actually agree with what Heidi was saying, is that, when it comes down to it, people will go into that polling booth and they will say, we know where we've been for the last 43 years. We have an EU, of course, that changes, it evolves, because the world moves on. We have globalisation, we have increasing interdependence. Or we have what? The fact of the matter is, the Leave campaigns can't even sort out their own act to decide who's speaking for whom. So let alone telling us what out looks like. I mean, I think they have a duty. This referendum is not an opinion poll on the EU as it stands. It's about 2 possible futures. And at the moment, we only know one future, which is our membership of the EU.
A quick answer from you on that, Douglas.
Out looks a lot more prosperous than in. We've managed to tie ourselves to the world's only declining trade bloc because we're in your own. I know you're very keen to talk about the Port Talbot Steelworks. So in your own part of the world, Stephen, being in the EU means high energy costs are pricing us out of being able to compete. No. This is because of our EU membership.
It means
needs
the
to
British
change.
government that has failed to play the game properly.
What about, let's bring the whole migration question into this, because there are constituents for MPs across the board who say of course, we want to give a home to desperate refugees, people who are fleeing war and hideous regimes. But resources and services in our constituencies are tight. Now, Heidi, what do you say to your constituents who are concerned about bringing more immigrants into the UK?
Well, I think it's very easy to mix the two topics together. There's a clear difference between bringing in refugees who have nothing and need a home and us having economic migrants who come here and don't participate.
And you're absolutely right to make the clear definition between the two.
But unfortunately, when people, have queues at GP surgeries and can't get their kiddies into schools, then suddenly the waters get very muddied. And, it's wrong, but it does happen that people use the same brush to tar both populations. But, ultimately it's about our ability to manage our borders, whether that's through how we play the benefit system, how we make it attractive to economic migrants, and also just administrationally how we control it. So that's for us as a government to get better at, not just about saying no. And if we can control our borders, then we can control who we bring in as refugees as well.
Heidi is absolutely right. This isn't just about the economic challenges we face. We face enormous technological and demographic challenges, new circumstances beyond our experience. In order for us to respond to that, we need to take back control. The EU is a mid-20th century organisation. It simply can't respond to the world of the 21st century. The safer thing is if we take back control of our borders, take back control and make sure we have a migration policy that actually means we play our part, but play our part responsibly.
Do you think, though, that migration as it is now is a global crisis of such huge proportions? Isn't David Cameron's negotiation a bit of a distraction from these much bigger problems? Rather than touring Europe trying to sell his package, wouldn't he be better at the EU table talking with his partners who are also overwhelmed by the scale of it?
Well, absolutely. And my sense is also, if you look at what's happening in Calais, we currently have our border in Calais because we have such close and deep cooperation with the French authorities. Do we think that cooperation would be improved or diminished if we were to leave the EU? Clearly, the French would just say, OK, off you go. Off you go to the, move over to Dover. So the fact of the matter is, when you have deep and complex interdependence and globalisation knocking at the door, the answer to that question must surely be more cooperation, more partnership. Or what? Is it Norway? Is it Turkey? Is it Switzerland? Is it Singapore? Somebody has to please tell us what the alternative is.
Now, Heidi, you have spent some time in a refugee camp in Greece in recent days. We're just going to hear a little snippet of you at the Karatepe camp on the island of Lesbos.
Lots of children running around. It's a tremendous facility, actually. And the loveliest part is that, say, the children manage to find a small space for children to play, toys. They can draw, they can paint. Some really beautiful paintings, actually, but some very, very sad ones as well. But that's part of the process here to try and help the children come through the journey. Lots of IKEA huts, which are great, but we need to have them what they call winterised, so some of them don't have heating in them, and that, of course, is so important. Today's a lovely sunny day, but we had snow last week.
So what did you learn from your visit there? I mean, you saw two very different camps. Tell me what you brought home and what you want to do and press the government to do.
I tell you what gets me upset just listening to that again, actually, because I can remember those drawings. It's brought home that no matter how difficult these EU negotiations are and all the, the politics that's wrapped up in that, we must not lose sight of our humanity. There are people in this world that need our help. And when I talked earlier about this feeling that I think people will take to the polling booth, that feeling for me is that the world is getting smaller. When our relatives, our friends, our partners on this planet move because their lives are so miserable, actually, if I can't work out whether pennies, shillings and pence add up or don't add up in terms of whether we should stay in the EU, my feeling that I want to offer the hand of friendship and resources to human beings just a few miles away, I don't give two hoots whether I call them Europeans or call them anything else, but that's our duty. And that makes me feel that actually a global community, a EU community are perhaps better equipped to do that together because it's our problem. My God, we've got to sort it together.
So that makes you veer towards staying in. Douglas, are you happy that immigration is such a focus in this EU debate on whether to stay or leave, given what Heidi's just said?
Well, of course, immigration is massively important. Look at the huge challenge that Europe faces with a million people alone moving to Germany. But I would say this is all the more reason why we need to take back control. We could be, and I think we are, in fairness to the government, being fairly effective in providing some support where we can in the camps in Turkey. We can do a lot more, but I don't think that giving control to the European institutions is going to solve this problem.
Heidi, what's happened with giving places to unaccompanied children?
Well, disappointingly, I don't think anything yet. This is my tax credits 2 moment. I'm going to be a general pain in the bleep about this because, what I saw, and people push you for a number, how many? Honestly, I don't know because there's such chaos in Lesvos. What I do know is that we need to give resources into Europe to help with the administration to identify who is unaccompanied. And then we'll know how many. I would like to say over 1,000. I don't know. But I know we need to do more. And just because we're giving aid, rightly so, in the region, and goodness, I'm proud of that. These people, what are we going to do? Did you know the smugglers, when they push people off in dinghies, give them knives to puncture the dinghies when they arrive on the Greek shore so they can't be sent back again? These children, these families are in Europe now, and no aid that we give in Syria is going to give them a home to go to.
Unaccompanied children, Steve?
Well, I agree absolutely with what Heidi was saying. This is an issue where we've got to show compassion and solidarity. Those are the values on which the European Union is founded.
Stephen, Heidi, Douglas, thanks very much indeed.